Once again, hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for the Winning Local Protections Advocacy Workshop. Today is a really exciting milestone moment in the growing movement for family and relationship rights, acceptance, and equity. Today, we'll be talking about how to pass local non-discrimination protections. We're really excited to have you all here and to share in this information. This is a really exciting culmination of many months of collaboration between a number of groups working in coordination across the non-monogamy space. But it's also the start of a really exciting new chapter in the non-monogamy movement as we invite all of you to take action to begin extending these protections to your community. Pleased to introduce myself. My name is Brett Chamberlain, he, him. I'm the founder and executive director of the Organization for Polyamory and Ethical Non-Monogamy, which I'll introduce in a moment. I'm also very pleased to be joined by my co-presenters today, Heron Greensmith and Rachel Pertell. Why don't I pass to Heron and invite you to introduce yourself?
Hi, all. Thank you so much, Brett. My name is Heron Greensmith. I am a co-founder of the Polyamory Legal Advocacy Coalition. My day job is Deputy Policy Director. I always stumble over that. Deputy Policy Director at the Transgender Law Center. We're the largest trans organization in the United States, and I do policy for us. I'm also an adjunct professor at Boston University School of Law, where I teach queerness and the law. I live in Boston with my little family, and I'm super happy to be here.
Great. Thank you, Heron. Rachel, would you like to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Pertell. I am the research and development lead at the Modern Family Institute, but I also have affiliations with the Polyamory Legal Advocacy Coalition as well as the APA Division 44 Committee on Consensual Non-Monogamy. And my day job is being a research associate at the National Communication Association, which is an academic association for our social scientific field. Very excited to be here with you all today, and I use she, her pronouns.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. As I mentioned, this presentation is, and the toolkit that we'll be sharing is a collaboration between a number of organizations. We always laugh that it's very fitting that folks in the non-monogamy and family equity space should be collaborating as fruitfully as the groups involved have in this case. So I'd love to just briefly introduce 5 of the organizations behind today's webinar and the toolkit. The first is Chosen Family Law Center, which is a 501c3 nonprofit providing LGBTQ plus free legal services for families and individuals in New York and New Jersey. The Harvard Law School LGBTQ plus Advocacy Clinic, which engages in impact litigation, legislative and policy advocacy, and direct representation on behalf of the LGBTQ plus community. The Modern Family Institute, which unites research, storytelling, policy, and clinical practice to foster a society that appreciates and nurtures an evolving understanding of family. The Organization for Polyamory and Ethical Non-Monogamy, which is a grassroots advocacy nonprofit working to advance legal rights and cultural acceptance for non-monogamous families and relationships of all varieties. And finally, the Polyamory Legal Advocacy Coalition, or PLAC, a multidisciplinary coalition of academic and legal professionals which seeks to advance the civil and human rights of polyamorous individuals, communities, and families. So a real brain trust here that's put our minds together, leverage some of our learnings from successful past campaigns and careers in advocacy and legal work in order to bring you what I hope is a very useful resource that can really supercharge the growing non-monogamy rights movement. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, the objective of today's webinar is to really provide you a top-level overview of what you need to know to go forth and work on passing local non-discrimination protections in your city. We'll start with an introduction to the non-discrimination legislation itself. What is it? What does it do? And what are we hoping to achieve with these protections? Next, we'll go through an overview of the legislative advocacy toolkit itself. This is the underlying resource that we're publishing right now, which will remain accessible as a resource for folks to refer back to as you continue with your organizing efforts. Then we'll provide a bit of an overview of the legislative advocacy process. Finally, we'll talk about some fundamentals of grassroots organizing, as well as some messaging and storytelling tips. And then we'll end with a Q&A. The Q&A section will not be recorded, so folks are welcome to come on video, and we'll have a little bit more of an open discussion. Well, let's kick right off with an introduction to the non-discrimination legislation. And for this, I will pass to Heron.
Thank you so much, Brett. Again, my name is Heron Greensmith. I'm a co-founder of the Polyamory Legal Advocacy Coalition. You can find us at polyamorylegal.org, I believe. I can drop that in the chat later. And I am happy to introduce us to our non-discrimination legislation with the help of Mr. Bill here. So for those just from the very, very top, non-discrimination protections protect in the United States, protect individuals based on specific characteristics from discrimination in specific venues. For example, we have federal laws that protect us on the basis of sex, race, national origin, color, religion, from discrimination in employment, discrimination in housing, some discrimination in credit and real estate, and discrimination in education. Some of those laws you may have noticed are in flux right now, given some executive orders that are coming out of the Trump administration. So I wanted to acknowledge that as well. But our specific draft legislation would provide for the non-discrimination protections in your jurisdiction, whatever those are, for folks that live in diverse family and relationship structures. So we can talk a little bit about the sample legislation itself later on, but we describe family and relationship structure to mean, I'm going to read a whole paragraph and I might stop in between to talk about different bits of the paragraph, but essentially family and relationship structure mean the actual or perceived involvement or lack thereof of an individual in an intimate personal relationship or relationships other than a marital relationship. Now, we could have stopped there. That is pretty broad and covers most of our communities, especially ethical non-monogamous communities and polyamorous communities. But we really wanted to make sure that we were responsive to all non-nuclear families who need protection from discrimination. So I'll go on. It includes an individual's actual or perceived affinity or lack thereof for any given type of intimate personal relationship other than a marital relationship, regardless of what the individual is currently in any intimate personal relationship. It includes multi-partner and multi-parent families and relationships, step families, multi-generational households, diverse family structures, consensually non-monogamous relationships, and consensual, sexual, and or intimate relationships, including asexual and aromantic relationships. You can tell that we wanted this legislation to cover, as I said, all non-nuclear families who might face discrimination based on their family or relationship structure. I'm talking about intergenerational families. I'm talking about grandparents raising grandkids. I'm talking about siblings living together. I'm talking about extended families. And of course, I'm talking about families with more than two partners and more than two parents. Why it matters. Excellent. This matters because we know our families do face discrimination. We face discrimination in housing. We face discrimination in employment. We face discrimination in credit, in city services, in city-supported facilities. And through this legislation, we can help ensure that our families have a recourse if they do face discrimination in any of these circumstances. The toolkit itself has a lot of information about specific disparities that you can use to sway folks. We also have disparities, some statements about discrimination in the sample legislation itself to talk about how it's important to have this discrimination, this legislation. Excellent. So the movement vision with this legislation is a large, all-encompassing, intersectional one. We know that diverse families are less likely to be white, more likely to be families of color. We know that families of color tend to, more than white families, be raising children living together in multi-generational households. And we know that because of whiteness, because of capitalism, because of colonialism, these families have been illegible to the law. And we want to make them not only legible to the law, but worthy of protection from discrimination.
Thank you so much, Heron, for running us through the legislation, getting a little bit into the actual substance of it, and really contextualizing why this work is so important now more than ever. So, the toolkit itself is a comprehensive resource that walks you through the process of passing this non-discrimination legislation from top to bottom. It covers things like building a coalition, the fundamentals of organizing, telling your story, a lot of the content that we're covering during today's conversation. There's two ways to access this toolkit. You can access it as a PDF via the URL currently on the screen. And if you're just listening and not watching, that's harvard.turtl.co/story/polyamory legislative toolkit. You can also visit it as a website on Open's website, open-love.org/legislative toolkit. So two different ways to play suitable to your needs, your interests. If you're looking to print it out or have a dynamic PDF, head on over to that turtle, as we like to call it, or click on over to Open's website. Same content across both sites. So what's in the toolkit itself? Well, as I mentioned, it's going to cover a lot of the content that we're talking about today. It's broken up into a number of sections, running you through the various stages of the organizing process, starting with finding your allies. Who is it that can stand with you in advocating for these protections, leveraging their skills, their organizational capacities, and relationships? Next, we provide an overview of the legislative process, which we'll cover here in just a moment. Then we also talk about finding a sponsor for your bill. This is one of the most critical state steps of passing these local protections is finding an elected official, a council member that is willing to bring this to the floor. Then we address some of the potential challenges. There can be challenges, there could be opposition. It's been pretty smooth sailing so far, but we do want to ensure that we're accounting for the possibility that folks may have questions about these protections. Finally, we'll provide some messaging and storytelling tips that we'll be providing a summary of in today's conversation. And then critically, you can find some template outreach materials. So these are everything from the initial email that you can send to your city council member requesting a meeting, an information packet that you can print off and bring, all the way to the end of the process where you'll find a template press release you can deliver to local media to share, hopefully, a victory. The idea here is to make it as easy as possible for you to go about starting this organizing effort in your community. Of course, all of these template materials are adaptable, so we encourage you to remix them, adapt them to your local context, but really want to just give people as much as we can to try and make this process as seamless as possible. So let's dig into the legislative process itself. Why don't I pass back to Heron for this, and I will go ahead and spotlight you, Heron.
Me.
You.
I am a policy attorney. I was trained in policy advocacy at the Family Equality Council from 2010 to 2013, where I worked right out of law school. We worked on the Hill, Capitol Hill, doing legislative and regulatory advocacy for LGBT families. After that, I moved to the Movement Advancement Project, where I analyzed legislation and its impact on queer folks. So this is my bread and butter, and now I do policy advocacy for trans folks at the Trans Law Center. So the legislative process is a fairly simple one, and it is iterative across federal, state, and local processes, although there are some idiosyncrasies with each process, but they all begin at some point with a drafting stage. Drafting is the part of the stage where you write the legislation, and we have done that for you. A small anecdote, when I was working at Family Equality Council, this is why I bring it up in the first place, not just to brag about my cool resume. When I was working at Family Equality Council, I drafted sample legislation for safer schools. And I was told that sample legislation can be dangerous. So I want to illustrate why we are giving you sample legislation here and why we have so many caveats around using sample legislation that you haven't, for example, talked with attorneys about or talked with your local counselor about. So as you'll see in the sample legislation, I linked, it's in the turtle and it's right here as well in the chat. We have findings, we have a lot of whereases, we have some definitions sections, and we have, let me see what that last section is called. It has a funny name. the recognition and scope. These are all elements of drafting. You may need to plug and play different elements of your legislation depending on how your city or county legislates around non-discrimination, whether it has a omnibus non-discrimination protection law, or it has piecemeal laws that have been updated throughout the years. But it's important that we understand where exactly to plug in these pieces, and that is important to find out during the drafting stage. Next is the introduction. And the introduction is, we'll talk a little bit about finding a sponsor for your bill, but the introduction is when we have introduced an ordinance, and sometimes city councilors want to do something around the introduction to signify their support for a particular population. For example, consensually non-monogamous families. A legislator with a particular relationship with a community might want to highlight that relationship and highlight that this community is being served in this way. But introduction can often serve as a way to flag that this legislation is coming and might also bring supporters out of the woodwork.
And actually, Heron, could you talk a little bit about finding a sponsor at this stage?
Yeah, so finding a sponsor is, I'm smiling because finding a sponsor is fun. Finding a sponsor means finding a council person who is willing to be the council person to bring legislation to the council, or to the, let's be aspirational, or to the state house, for example. Sponsors can come in many different forms and can be found in lots of different ways. You can find a sponsor through something that they said in the media. You can find a sponsor through a community outreach event. For example, maybe a Pride event, and a council member has a booth at Pride. You can find a council member by writing to your council members and asking them if they support consensually non-monogamous families. There are lots of ways to find sponsors. Committees. So, as we say in the toolkit, it is not efficient to have every member of a legislative body read through every piece of legislation that is submitted to the legislature. I'm just reading the chat. Bitsy says you could do the thing I did and just run for the town meeting yourself. Absolutely. You can be your sponsor. You can be your own sponsor. Thank you, Bitsy. So when a bill is submitted to a body of legislature, usually it is then sent to a committee who have staff and members who are highly educated on the area of law in which the legislation is being introduced. So, for example, there could be a Health and Human Services Committee in which a non-discrimination provision might be sent, or there could be a Civil Rights Committee in which to which a non-discrimination legislation might be sent as well. So the next step after introduction is usually a committee, and then that committee might hold hearings. It might not. A lot of this is very squishy, depends on the speed of the specific legislature, depends on the appetite of the legislature for hearings. Some bills get hearings automatically, some do not. Hearings themselves can be very interesting to hear if there is any opposition to any specific legislation, as folks can come from impacted communities and from the community itself, just the community around the municipality in which folks are promoting the legislation. And the hearing itself is an opportunity for us, the experts, to get our expertise on the record in support of this legislation. So we can submit reports, we can submit data, we can submit specific, have a doctor come in and submit how important it is for public health that folks have protection from discrimination in their non-nuclear family. We could have an attorney come in, like a member of PLAC, for example. We have a couple of family law attorneys who can come in and talk about how important it is for their families to be able to access non-discrimination. And it's an opportunity for the council members to hear and react to the important things that we're raising about this legislation. And then finally, it gets put to a vote. This may happen in the committee to vote it to the larger council with a recommendation to pass the bill. Let's hope that that happens with this legislation that we're all going to be submitting. And so the smaller committee will have a vote, send that to the larger council, city council, town hall, who will then vote on whether the legislation should be enrolled into the laws and rules of the town or municipality in which it is being introduced. Votes are also fun times. You can tell I'm suited to be a policy attorney because I actually enjoy the whole process. It is fun to me. But votes are a great time to get public support. Brett, I don't know if you want to tab really quickly back to that picture of all of us standing on the city hall, but that was after the vote in Cambridge, right? I think. There we go.
That was in Oakland, yeah.
In Oakland. That's why I'm not there because
I
I'm
should
not.
have
I'm
pulled the
in
Cambridge one. I'm
Massachusetts.
sorry.
No, it's okay. This was after the vote, and look how happy everybody is. And after your vote, then your legislation is passed, still needs to be enrolled and incorporated into the statutes and rules and regulations of your municipality. But that is the very high level process.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I can tell how much you love this stuff. I enjoy it too. Next time, if you could please prepare a high school or a Schoolhouse Rock style musical presentation of that.
Who says I didn't?
That's fair. Maybe that's the after party. Thanks for spinning us through the legislative process. So let's talk about fundamentals of organizing. I think a lot of people think that organizing has to look like this, right? Leading marches, shouting into a megaphone. And from time to time, you do get to do that. But organizing more often looks like this. Looks like a group of people sitting around a table, making connections, making a plan, having conversations one-on-one in living rooms and community centers, the people you run into at the grocery store, talking on the phone with your fellow organizers, with your electeds, and yes, spreadsheets. We love a good color-coded spreadsheet. And did you notice that this person's spreadsheet matches their nails? We should all aspire to that level of organizing panache. So let's talk a little bit about organizing itself. So the first thing is you got to build a team. Organizing is not a one-person game. It takes a lot of different people and time and energy and skills. Really, nothing should be a one-person, well, some things should be one-person activities, but organizing certainly not. So a couple roles that you might look for on your team are a coordinator, someone that maintains a top level view on everything, can help schedule the meetings, get people on the phone, send out the Zoom link, take notes. You also might want to have a communicator, somebody that feels really comfortable doing a media interview, speaking in public at a community meeting, or speaking at presenting about your issue at a possible partner organizations meeting, speaking at city council meetings. Having a coalition builder is also really important. Talk next about building a coalition, but you're going to want to have somebody that can go out and connect with other organizations, tell them about what we're trying to achieve here, and see if you can get their support. We are mightier together, not just as individuals, but as organizations, just like you saw the organizations that came together to put this resource and this presentation together. It can be very helpful to have a council liaison, one person who can be the point of contact for various council members, particularly once you do find a sponsor or co-sponsors. This can be the person that's the main point of contact just to streamline the communications and make sure that nothing gets dropped. It's always clear who's going to be the one replying to a council member or their aides. And this one, I think, really often gets overlooked, but it's super important. You want to have a carer, right? You want to have the person that can look out for folks, who can help provide a ride for somebody who doesn't have a vehicle to get to your meeting, who can show up with snacks and food, who can provide some, a sympathetic ear if somebody has something going on in their personal life or their professional life that's impacting their ability to show up. Organizing is fundamentally relational. It's human work, and all of us show up as humans. And that means sometimes we need a little support. So building care and compassion and connection and the ability to show up as humans in our organizing work is critically important. And I also just love that all of these started with C's because I love alliteration. That keeps happening, I think, in the non-monogamy space, whether you talk about compersion or compassion or communication or connection or cooperation, something to do with Latin prefixes. But these are a few of the roles that you might want to look forward to fill as you build your team. Making a plan is essential. You got to know what it is that you're actually going to go about doing. So some of the stages of your plan for passing a municipal ordinance might start like this. It's going to start with power mapping. Power mapping is really just like activist speak for like who's the person you want to talk to, who gets things done, who's got the relationships and the connection, what are the pressures and incentives at play. So an obvious place to start is who's on your city council? What is their political breakdown? Is there somebody that like holds a lot of sway and holds a lot of cards on the council whose support you're definitely going to need? Are there community organizations that you want to engage in your work? We'll talk more about that next in building a coalition. You're going to start that coalition outreach to see if you can get folks on board with what you're doing. Coalitions can provide a lot of support. They can draft letters of support. They can leverage existing relationships with other community members or with elected officials. They can help expand the breadth of identities and voices and experiences that we're bringing to these issues. Because as Heron shared earlier, these protections are not just about relationship structure, protecting non-monogamous folks, polyamorous folks, folks in the lifestyle, but they're also about protecting family structure. So bringing in some of those other identities can be really important. Then you're going to want to go about starting your outreach to the council. As Heron shared, the goal here is really twofold. It's to find a sponsor for the bill, and it's also to tally whether or not you have the support of everyone on the council. It's generally a very good idea to make sure that your bill will actually pass before it gets introduced. So as much as you can do to ensure that council members have had conversations with you before the bill gets sponsored, that you can address any concerns, answer their questions, so that when it actually goes into the process, it's smooth sailing. Next is education and advocacy, right? This is actually about getting the bill through. It's about communicating to people why this matters, who you are, and really just pushing to make sure that the votes pass and that the bill gets implemented. It's also leveraging the moment that the introduction and ultimately passage of this bill creates to tell more stories about non-monogamous identities and diverse family structures. So engaging your local media to say, hey, this really exciting thing is happening in our community. Let's talk not only about this bill, but about the people behind it and why this intervention matters. It's super important to celebrate too. When the bill gets passed, have a party, celebrate the small wins along the way. Organizing can be a lot of work. Sometimes there can be a lot of disappointment or delays. So it's really, really important that we fill our cups when we have the opportunity to, that we celebrate, that we leverage those moments to remind ourselves and each other how powerful we actually can be now more than ever. I know that these are times that feel very stressful. It's difficult for people to know what they can do. And I think returning to some of these local interventions is a really great opportunity for us to remind ourselves that we can accomplish a lot when we organize together. Finally, I do want to note about implementation. So the way that these bills are structured typically rely on individuals, aggrieved parties to bring forward a civil action. So what that means is that there's not going to be a special squadron of your local police department who's going around and make sure that nobody's turning people away on the basis of their family structure. Instead, if you experience discrimination, this bill creates the statutory basis for you to effectively file a lawsuit and claim damages. But these protections are only as useful as they are known to the people who would benefit from them. So after the bill gets passed, it's a really great idea to go around to community organizations, say your local housing rights group, your local LGBTQ plus group, and make sure that people know that this bill has been passed. These protections are accessible so that people actually know if something happens to them, if they are discriminated against in violation of this bill, they know that it's against the law and they know what they can do about it. So I've talked a couple times about forming a coalition. Who are some of the groups that you might want to reach out to as part of your coalition? Well, an obvious starting point is non-monogamy groups. Keep in mind, too, that non-monogamy is a broad umbrella term. It's not just your local polyamory meetup, but it's also the swinger club or the lifestyle club in your town. There's also sex positive groups and kink groups. There might be a local kink munch or a sex positive club, an event series who might be interested in connecting some of their membership in with the work that you're doing. LGBTQIA plus organizations are another really obvious coalition partner. Folks who hold LGBTQ plus identities are more likely to practice non-monogamy, and In many ways, this is a more mature movement that's been organizing in parallel tracks for many decades, and they have great skills and capacities and relationships that can really help advance these efforts. They're real natural partners for this work. Connecting with family groups can be important too. As I mentioned earlier, family diversity is an important component of this. And so seeing if you can find local organizations that support multi-generational families or blended families or single parents, single parents by choice who are protected by these that might have a local coffee hour or meetup. It's really great to bring those voices in and expand the scope beyond just non-monogamy. Housing rights group or another great organization to engage. Again, most communities have a housing rights group of some form. Housing is one of the domains protected by this bill, and so these can be really fantastic partners. Labor unions are also excellent partners in this work. There's also opportunities for them to build these protections into their collective bargaining agreements or their labor contracts. So there's a parallel thread there in addition to passing this public policy. Organizations like labor unions or even corporations can implement these protections within their own internal policies. And finally, progressive organizations, whether that's immigration defense groups, your local, DSA. There's various groups that are really interested in the big picture here, which is challenging normative models of organizing society that tends to put people into boxes, that tends to perpetuate modes of inequality, such as the marginalization of non-monogamous families and relationships. And these often have political organizing arms that'll be really excited to engage with you around this very concrete local intervention. I want to bring in Heron's comments from the chat too regarding LGBTQI organizations. Queer families often look different from nuclear families in important ways. Folks are more likely to construct chosen families, networks of care that can really benefit from these protections. And Heron also notes that migrant justice orgs may have a lot of families who don't look like the nuclear families. That's also really important. Migrant families who may be of lower socioeconomic brackets are more likely to live in multi-generational families in particular and can be really great partners in this organizing work. All right. If you got to organize, you got to be organized. So you want to create a central info hub. You want to make sure that there's one place that people can go to get all the documents. So if they happen to have a pop-up meeting all of a sudden with the city council member, they know where to go to download the info packet and keep everything collated so that it's not living in one person's head or on one person's local hard drive where there's a bottleneck to actually accessing it. You want to hold regular check-ins to make sure that everyone is staying involved in the conversation, to make sure that everyone knows what's happening and what the next steps are. Definitely tracking your contacts and your outreach is a really important step. So as you're building a coalition, who is your point of contact at that coalition? As you're reaching out to council members, who contacted them? When? Did you speak with a council member or one of their staffers, like a legislative aide? In larger cities, council members will typically have a staff of their own. That may not be the case in a smaller town, but certainly in larger cities. Who are all the people on your mailing list or on your phone list? Who are the people that came to your community kickoff meeting and expressed their support and their interest in getting involved? You got to know who you're talking to, how you're talking to them, when you're talking to them, what they said. And finally, keeping clear next roles and clear next steps. It should be really important to know who's the person you might want to go to about a different dimension of the organizing work, and critically, what is the priority at any moment? So if you're focused on building a coalition, you should all be aware of that and be doing outreach to coalition partners. If you're working on finding a sponsor, everyone should be aligned that that's the objective at that time. And particularly as the bill progresses through committee and through votes, keeping people apprised of what the actual hearing dates are to make sure that you're able to turn people out to express their support and share their stories. And take care of each other. I touched on this earlier, but organizing can be hard work. Sometimes it can take time, many months or even years to get even a local intervention like this passed through. And so just make sure that you're checking in, that you're building in time for celebration, that you are building community around these efforts. Finally, you want to maintain momentum. I think that this image here, Newton's cradle, is really apt. If you're not watching on video and you're not familiar, Newton's cradle are the row of balls hanging from strings where you swing one and the last one knocks out. I think this is a great metaphor because when you lose momentum, it really has an impact all the way down the line. So think of putting a packing peanut between two of those balls. And now instead of swinging down and the last one will knock out, that packing peanut, that last lack of momentum will kind of suck all the energy out. And then you don't have that movement at the end. Maybe that's a little strained of a metaphor, but it works for me. So you want to be providing people regular updates, both within your coalition and within your organizing team. You want to, again, make sure that people know what's happening and what the next steps are. You want to be consistent. So if you're holding meetings, it can be really helpful to hold them every other week or every month at the same time so that people know when to show up and they know that when they show up, there will be people there ready to engage and collaborate. Follow up and follow through. So if you have a meeting with a council member and you say that you'll follow up with an info packet or an answer to their question, make sure that you do that. If you have a meeting with a council member and there's no clear next steps, follow up. Reach out again, say, hey, did you have any more questions? We're really excited. Can we count on your support? Or would you like to schedule another meeting? Again, it's all about making sure that there's a clear next step and that things keep moving forward. And again, celebrate small wins, all that little incremental progress. Did you have a meeting with a council member who said they'd support the bill, but they wouldn't sponsor it? That's a win. That means that you've got one more vote in your back pocket. So really make sure that you're taking time to reflect on and appreciate the wins, capture learnings, and carry that momentum and that energy forward to the next phase. And again, build community. This is just a great way to build relationships, to build connections, to offer and express care, both within the specifics of this particular intervention, but also within the broader community that is arising, that is emerging around this work. There's also a hope that the teams and the coalitions that develop to promote this particular legislation can become hubs for other legislation. We're still in the fairly early days of the non-monogamy rights movement as an organized national political force. And there's a lot more work to be done at the state level, ultimately at the federal level. So the connections that get built through this work can really have longitudinal impact. Let's move on to messaging and storytelling. And for this, I'll pass over to Rachel.
Thanks, Brett and Heron, so much for sharing all that wisdom. Really excited and grateful for the opportunity to jump in here and sprinkle a little bit of my expertise as a researcher and educator in communication. But yeah, it might seem a little counterintuitive, but different audiences will respond differently to different messages. So it is important to consider who you're speaking with, their relationship and familiarity to the cause you are advocating for, and select your message strategy accordingly. In the toolkit, we have included, as Brett mentioned, some template language and supporting materials that you can use to start initial conversations. They can also help guide you through various conversations you might find yourself in throughout this process, and also some materials to help you amplify your impact once your advocacy efforts are successful. When initially reaching out to legislators and community leaders that you've identified as supportive of your or other similar causes, approach them respectfully and with clear intentions, simply to begin and open up a dialogue on an issue impacting your municipality. Be sure to emphasize to elected officials that this is also a leadership opportunity, and ensure them that they will have local backing and that they won't be alone in their support of this effort. Once you're able to secure a meeting with a community leader or an elected official, be sure to come prepared with talking points, relevant informational documents and data, and think very carefully about questions that you might be asked and how you're going to respond to them. We've included all of these things in the toolkit to help you get started, as well as a script if you wish to comment, deliver a testimonial, or give subject matter expertise at any public meetings. When garnering community support, a good place to start is by educating your audience, especially when they lack understanding about what exactly it is you're advocating for. And always remember, when people are unfamiliar with a topic and the terms and vocabulary related to it, that can cause a lot of anxiety. People worry about making mistakes, saying the wrong thing, offending others, and this could lead to disengagement. So consider carefully the words that you use in these conversations and whether or not you might need to explain or define them to reduce that anxiety in your audience and keep them engaged and willing to be a part of the dialogue with you. First-person language is also a powerful tool for advocates to establish trust and credibility with their audiences. Using first-person language can humanize the issues that you're advocating for, as well as the emotional and practical realities of family and relationship structure and diversity issues. In other words, first-person language really helps to provide context to broader issues, and it might encourage others to share their own stories, build solidarity and community with you, and even motivate them to action. In addition to first-person language, sharing these personal stories are really important. No one knows your story or your community like you do. When you're able to get legislators, or other external supporters to a place of understanding of all the personal stories that are behind this movement, your community, or whatever cause you're advocating for, that's when you'll really see legislators and community leaders connect with the issue and become champions for these causes. And then you'll really start to see them move items forward in your district or state. However, we do recognize that not everyone has the privilege to come out and share these deeply personal accounts of how these issues impact them. So we also want to remind everyone that doing this is a really big decision with a lot of factors to be considered and should not be taken lightly. But if you do feel safe and comfortable in sharing your personal stories, we have included some resources and information to guide folks in effectively conveying these messages. In this toolkit, we have compiled nearly 10 different personal anecdotes from people sharing their own personal stories. These advocates discuss their experiences sharing these stories and how they went about setting and maintaining healthy boundaries for themselves throughout the process as they navigated this. So lots of wisdom there. Once your advocacy efforts are successful and your legislation is passed, it is so important to engage with the media and promote your victory. Not only will you inform and be a beacon of hope for your own community, but your victory could inspire action and mobilize advocates in other areas as well. To this goal, we have included a template press release in the toolkit that can be distributed widely to any press contacts. But you might also find yourself in a position where you have an opportunity to speak publicly on this issue and your advocacy. When speaking publicly or to the media, we recommend beginning with shared values, such as protecting health, respecting autonomy, and equitable opportunities for all families, and how your legislation upholds and promotes all these shared values. These values will resonate widely, and it's going to help frame your advocacy in a way that is highly relatable and very compelling. At the same time, though, also be sure to localize the issue, highlighting the specific impact on your local community or state by presenting relevant data and examples. In addition to the power of first-person language, which we talked about earlier, it's also helpful to demonstrate broad support for your position by highlighting endorsements from respected organizations and key validators, relevant to relationship and family structure diversity. Including these voices will help add credibility to your advocacy and demonstrate that your stance is part of a larger, well-supported movement. Be sure that you're also highlighting diverse perspectives when you bring in these outside voices and amplify them, including both positive and negative experiences of community members and a wide variety of community experts, including healthcare providers, lawyers, and social workers. Demonstrating this broad support from various different angles will ultimately strengthen your case and highlight the quantifiable impact of the legislation. And with that, I will pass it back to Brett.
Hello, my name is Willie Burnley Jr., and I am a city councilor in Somerville, Massachusetts. I'm also the primary sponsor of the first set of polyamorous non-discrimination ordinances to ever be passed in the United States. These laws prohibited our city from discriminating against anyone in the areas of housing, employment, or policing due to their family or relationship structure. We blazed this path forward because we understood that no one should be denied these basic needs because of who or how many they love. Even though 2 years have passed since we passed these ordinances, the joy I see in the eyes of residents is still fresh. And that excitement continues to inspire people across the country to ask their local representatives to pass similar laws. So, as chaotic as these times may be, the way we hold each other close and keep each other safe is not to retreat. It is to advance. Thank you.
All right. And thank you, Willie, for your leadership in this really important issue. What's next? Well, go for it. Our hope is that today's webinar and the toolkit that we've shared will provide you the really clear guidance and tools. We hope that you leave here feeling empowered and fired up and ready to rock. One way that you can start that is by spreading the word. Again, building a team, building a coalition is a really important way to start. So if you're feeling excited to be the seed of change in your city, go ahead and share the toolkit, share this recording, or just invite people into a conversation with you about how you can start to build a team, build a coalition, and make a plan for passing these protections locally. There's a couple cities that have really exciting ongoing initiatives. So if you are in Seattle, we'd love to connect you with the Seattle Coalition for Family and Relationship Equity. Here in San Francisco, there's a number of folks on this call that just this morning we're sitting down with the staff member for a council member, or rather a supervisor in San Francisco. So we'd love to engage with you in this local work. And in Portland, groups are starting to put the pieces together to launch this initiative locally. There's a few more cities that are starting these efforts as well, but these are some of the larger ones that we'd love to plug you in with. But we'd love to add your city to this list. With that in mind, we are here to help. If you have questions about what you heard today, we will have a Q&A in just a moment. But if you start working locally and you run into a roadblock, if you have a question, if somebody asks a question about the legislation that you can't answer, or if you just need like a pep talk, we are here to help. You can reach out to us at info@open-love.org, and we can be your point of connection to the broader coalition behind this work. So we're excited to tap in our friends at PLAC, for example, to support with the legal research and legislative drafting and the various dimensions of this that I am personally unqualified for. One additional way that you can support this work is by donating. Oops, wait, nope, don't look at just open. There we go. Everybody. Because of course we are non-monogamous, and so we want to spread the love around. So various of the groups that are supporting, that are participating and brought you this toolkit are 501c3 nonprofits. Really in various forms, we all depend on your support. God knows we're not getting any federal grants. So I encourage you to take a look at the various organizations. If there's one that feels really inspiring to you and you're particularly excited about, go ahead and send a little love their way. Or if you are feeling able to do so, really appreciate your support all across the board. Again, the links encourage you to check out the toolkit itself, spend a little bit more time there. It goes much deeper into everything we've shared today. You can view it as a PDF at harvard.turtl.co/story/polyamory legislative toolkit with dashes in between, polyamory-legislative-toolkit. Or you can view it on Open's website, open-love.org/legislative toolkit. And once again, if you're looking for help or support or even have feedback about what you're seeing in the toolkit, something we missed, we'd love to hear from you at info@open-love.org. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching if you are sometime in the future. And we really hope to hear from you and work together towards a more open and loving world. Thank you.